morning, everybody. My name is Connor Flanagan, and I'm the Assistant Director here at the Southampton History Museum. This morning, we are joined by a new volunteer, Malve von Hassell. Today, she's going to be giving a fantastic talk. And if you do have any questions, comments, concerns during today's talk, please feel free to submit them in the chat function below or in the Q&A function, and I'll join back in at the end to ask any questions you might have. Thanks and enjoy.
Thank you, Connor, for this introduction. It's really an honor to be able to talk about my book. I would like to thank the Southampton History Museum for inviting me. Today, I will talk about the setting for my new release, The Amber Crane, provide a brief synopsis, and discuss the three major inspirations for the book and several aspects of historical significance. The Amber Crane was written for young adults and older readers as well. It falls into the category of historical fiction with a time slip element. The two time frames are 1644-45 and 1944-45. The setting for the book, in important respects, is reminiscent of the South Fork of Long Island in terms of the landscape, the local economy, and the importance of a history that must not be allowed to vanish. I brought this map. It's a present-day map showing the Baltic Sea and surrounding countries. The setting for the book is Pomerania, a historical region on the southern shore of the Baltic Sea in Central Europe. Today, it is split between Poland and Germany. Most of the action takes place in the harbor town of Stolpmünde, which is, if you can see my pointer, it's about here, a little bit west of Gdansk. Today it is called Ustka. Other scenes are set in the capital of the region, Stolp, today known as Slupsk, and in a village, Mutrin, today Montargino. The book also references the town of Königsberg, today Kaliningrad. Here is Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad or Königsberg was formerly a part of what was known as East Prussia. Königsberg was and still is at the heart of the amber industry. I might also mention that there's a phenomenal amber museum in Kaliningrad if you should ever have an opportunity to travel there. Much of Baltic amber comes from that region, both from the shore and also inland mining sites. One of my characters worked as a land girl in East Prussia, drafted as part of the compulsory labor required of all young people during World War II. Her journey west at the end of World War II is part of the story. Here you have, I apologize for the quality of the image. Here you have an aerial view of the harbor town Stolpmünde, the hometown of my protagonist, Peter. In the Middle Ages, Stolpmünde was a member of the Hanseatic League, a powerful medieval confederation of merchant guilds and market towns in Central and Northern Europe. Today, it is a very pleasant bathing resort town. Now for a brief synopsis of the Amber Crane to orient you. During a walk on the beach, Peter, an Amber Guild apprentice in Pomerania in the waning years of the 30 Years' War, comes upon amber entangled in a clump of seaweed. Despite the severe penalties imposed on such an action, he decides to keep the pieces and works on them in secret. Citizens could have been tortured, banned from their towns, and even executed through hanging and breaking on the wheel for hiding just a small piece of amber from the authorities. One piece Peter crafts into a little heart pendant and gives to his sister in the hope that it will comfort her as she recovers from a traumatic experience. The other one makes him think of a crane. Gradually, Peter realizes that this piece of amber has magical powers. Whenever he goes to sleep, he is catapulted into the future in dreamlike encounters. Peter witnesses the ravages of the last months of World War II in and around his home. He becomes embroiled in the troubles faced by a girl, Lyoba, who seeks to escape from the oncoming Soviet army. In his own time, while chafing against the rigid rules of the guild and the pressures from his family, Peter struggles with the consequences of his actions. His sister is accused of witchcraft and of having stolen an amber pendant, and the reputation of his master's workshop is placed in jeopardy. Eventually, Peter has to make a decision, and it involves accepting the loss of something he holds dear. The theme of loss echoes throughout the book: loss of one's home, loss of those you love, loss of history, and loss of something you value above everything else. How does one deal with this? How to let go of something? How to move on? We meet Peter, the young Amber Guild apprentice, when he's walking along the shoreline, even though he's strictly forbidden to do so. Here, an excerpt. A hoarse, rattling sound made Peter look up. A flock of cranes was taking off into the sky. They were free, he thought. If only they didn't screech so much. Usually he liked cranes. At least they did not fly in regimented formation like silly geese without a mind of their own, but rather in a raggedy, shifting V spilling across the sky like droplets of ink. One still sat in a clump of grass, apparently undecided whether to take off after his mates. That young crane was like him, stuck, unable to move. In another scene, Peter is thinking about what amber means to him. It was as if these amber pieces had attached themselves to a corner of his heart. They spoke to him of the sea and the dune grass swishing in the wind, of rolling fields and woods along the Baltic coastline, and of cranes flying, their wings beating in rhythm to the strange, hoarse chants of sorrow and longing. There were three main inspirations for the book. One was a fascination since my childhood with amber, a gemstone full of mystery and power. Its uses are infinite, not only for decorative items, but also for common household goods. And it was even thought to have medicinal properties. Amber is inextricably linked to the history of Pomerania, having occupied center stage in trade and politics over centuries. The second theme emerged from all the stories my mother used to tell me about her childhood home in Pomerania. The third theme is the history of the evacuation from Pomerania and East Prussia in the last months of World War II. Amber is fossilized tree resin from evergreen conifers dating back to between 35 and 50 million years ago. Found all over the world, amber is associated particularly with the Baltic Sea. Baltic amber accounts for as much as 80% of the world's amber supplies. Amber was collected along the shorelines of the Baltic coast and also mined in various inland regions. It has been much valued as a gemstone from antiquity to the present. In the Baltic regions, it was referred to as Baltic gold. Another name for it was tears of the gods, derived from several myths about the origins of this remarkable stone that continues to inspire the imagination. The image on the left shows raw Baltic amber, and the one on the right is a good example of an inclusion. Such pieces provide insight into plant and animal life in past centuries, past millennia. Here you can see more examples of inclusions and also a taste of the many colors of Baltic amber. Baltic amber has been an important trade item for many centuries, prized for its malleable nature, its versatility, and its beauty. Its appeal as a trade good was enhanced by the fact that amber is lightweight and consequently easily transported over long distances. Amber literally floats in water. This quality gave rise to legends about fishermen pursuing amber in the waves. From one such legend, sometimes beach watchmen and guards in search of treasure notice lovely huge pieces of amber floating in the water close to the shore. However, when they row their boats closer so they can lower their nets, it all turns out to be nothing but an illusion, vanishing in the froth of the sea. The distances that amber has traveled are astounding. Transported from regions along the Baltic Sea, amber reached Italy, Greece, the Black Sea, Syria, and Egypt. Baltic amber has been found in Mongolian burial grounds, and it traveled to Asia along the Silk Route. Armenians traveled to Königsberg in East Prussia, where they traded silk rugs for amber. Some of this amber made its way to places as far-flung as Bengal. On the above map, you can see a reference to Nida here. Nida. Nida is a town in Lithuania. Kaliningrad is just to the west of that on the coast. Skilled amber craft workers have transformed raw amber into countless religious items, jewelry, and household goods. In medieval times, amber was used to create religious artifacts, exquisite jewelry, ornaments, toys, flasks for gunpowder, small boxes, chessboards, and pipe stems, to name some of its principal uses. For several centuries, amber was fashioned into beads for rosaries at a volume one might well describe as mass production. For this reason, amber workers were often called paternoster makers, in reference to the rosary beads they crafted, with chains of beads long enough for saying one paternoster. The Amber Guild in Pomerania was a powerful organizing body that controlled apprenticeships, acquisition of raw materials, and marketing of finished amber products, in addition to providing an extensive system of aid and assistance to guild members in good standing. Here's an excerpt describing Peter's workshop. Trying to focus on his work, Peter breathed in the spicy scents of heated amber and amber dust. Usually, he loved the workshop with its tools and workbenches in front of long, narrow tables with wooden bars above on which they hung strings of finished beads. In front of each workstation was a box of tools, neatly organized. Every evening, Master Novak ran an experienced eye over the workstations, reprimanding his apprentices when they failed to put their clean tools back into their proper places. Rosary beads come in all colors. Here's an example. And the amber piece on the left, which I love particularly, has a color that's described as cognac. When I thought of the amber heart Peter crafted for his sister, I envisioned one with a small air bubble in its center. Here's a scene toward the end of the book where Peter tries to explain how he felt about his work as an amber craftsman. Peter glanced at the water. The wind had turned and he could taste the salty spray of the sea on his lips. Then he focused on Anne's face and her glowing eyes. And I cannot say any of this well. I know now what I want to do more than I ever did before. I want to craft pieces of amber that will make people happy. They will not stop the war. I know that, but they will be beautiful. Peter felt silent. He could not describe the amber he saw before his mind's eye in colors that glowed butter yellow, blood red, shimmering brown, and golden. Pieces that would be treasured hundreds of years later. He could not say that he wanted to learn new techniques because that might make Anne feel sad about her father. He wanted to say that each piece crafted by him would tell a story. Again, he touched the felt bundle. The amber crane was his secret, and it had to remain so. He could not say any of that. He just watched Anne's eyes, golden brown and filled with warmth. Pomerania and the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in European history. It resulted in 8 million casualties, devastated towns and villages wherever the war raged, especially in German-speaking regions, and caused widespread poverty and hunger. Initially a war between Protestant and Catholic states in the fragmented Holy Roman Empire, it gradually developed into a more general conflict involving most of the great powers in Europe. In a very literal sense of the term boots on the ground, there was hardly any strip of land untouched by the war. In addition to death as a direct result of battles, famine and disease decreased populations in many regions by as much as 50%. The last years of the war were particularly devastating to Brandenburg and Pomerania. For Peter, my protagonist, war was a fact of life. Here's an excerpt. But now, in 1644, the 27th year of the war, Peter could not imagine life in any other way. He cared little whether the Swedes or the imperialists were in control. It made no difference to the horrors and arbitrary punishments they inflicted on the populace. They simply took turns, pushing and shoving their way into town and devastating fields and villages all around. In their wake, sad throngs of people shuffled along dusty roads in search of food and shelter. People bit their lips and shook their heads when yet another one of the sons of Stolpmünde died on a distant battlefield. They turned away when refugees with gray, weary faces traveled through the town, walking silently, their feet wrapped in rags. They shrugged when fields lay fallow because there were not enough people left alive to plant them. That was life, the citizens said. There's nothing we can do. Maybe the war will end one day, but we have to take care of our own, they said, sighing and going on with the business of the day. Peter did the same, shrugging and turning away from what he could not change. Here you have a map of Pomerania from 1905. Peter lives in the harbor town, Stolpmünde. Okay, I'll point to Stolpmünde. The story takes him to Stolp, the capital of the region, and also to Mutrin. Here's the village of Mutrin, about 26 miles from the Baltic Sea. Mutrin was the childhood home of Lioba, the girl from the future, whom Peter is trying to help. Here's a little bit of background on Mutrin, since it figures into the story. Mutrin was a Sitzewitz family fief since the early 1300s. The last owner of the estate, Friedrich Karl von Sitzewitz, was arrested by the Gestapo for involvement in plans to resist Hitler, and only freed from prison when the Americans arrived in the spring of 1945. While this house dates back to the early 19th century, there are many other structures in the village and the region that date back to Peter's time. The principal industry in Mutrin was the growing of seed potatoes. There were 30 agricultural enterprises and 10 associated branch farms spread out over about 5,500 acres. Mutrin was essentially self-sufficient with nearly everything that was needed produced on the estate. This is one of the many typical roads that you see when you travel in that area. Here are some farm buildings on the estate. Some of the farm buildings date back to the 17th century. The use of red brick is typical for Pomerania and other regions in the east. This ice cellar is located close to the manor house and almost completely obscured by wilderness that has grown up in the park since 1945. Another ice cellar, fictional, while based on historical accounts, plays a role in the book. That ice cellar was built into the Stolpe riverbank in Stolpmünde, where it was hidden from view. It was used to hide goods during the 30 Years' War and to provide easy access to transport. I love this photograph. when my brother took this photograph, he had actually 5, and he created a whole panorama, but I wasn't able to replicate that on PowerPoint. Last months of World War II and the evacuation figure into the story. The photo on the left shows Stolp pre-1945. The one on the right shows the same area, albeit from another angle, at the end of World War II. In the book, there's a scene of children making snowmen in Stolp in early March, as if the war was not raging all around them, just before the arrival of the Soviet army. This was inspired by an eyewitness account of a similar scene in Königsberg. From late 1944 to the end of World War II, as many as 14 million Germans from East Prussia, Pomerania, Brandenburg, and Silesia fled to the West. Starting in the winter of 1944, hundreds of thousands of people in East Prussia began to flee, despite the still standing decree that evacuation bordered on traitorous behavior. Near the end of World War II, permission to evacuate was given only at the last minute, almost literally. In East Prussia, on January 20th, 1945, and in Pomerania on March 7th, 1945. The Red Army reached Stolp on March 8th. Many tried to reach the harbors along the Baltic Sea in the hopes of getting on board a cargo ship or a passenger ship. Those that made it onto ships faced a perilous ocean. As many as 200 ships encountered mines and were sunk by Soviet bombers or submarines, with a loss of roughly 33,000 people. The military transport ship Wilhelm Gustloff was one, with a loss of about 9,400 people. To date, the largest loss of life in a single ship sinking in history. In one of the war's bitter ironies, another ship, the Cap Arcona, carrying about 5,000 people who had been imprisoned in concentration camps, was sunk by the Royal Air Force in May 1945. Although Swedish and Swiss Red Cross officials had informed British intelligence of the presence of large numbers of prisoners on this one and other ships, this vital information was not passed on. In Germany, the term trek evokes what you see here. Hundreds of thousands from East Prussia and Pomerania traveling west with carriages and carts pulled by horses, mostly old people, women, and children. One of the most amazing stories about these treks involved the stud farms in East Prussia. People who had been raising a renowned breed of horses, the Trakenas, tried to save as much of their breeding stock as they could. There were only old men, young boys, and women with children to trek with the horses. Many of the mares were in foal. The overland trek covered a distance of 900 miles through mud, snow, and biting cold. Most horses were unshod. There was little to no food available and very little shelter. Often, the horses remained in harness overnight. It's a long way from East Prussia to the west, and part of the way meant crossing the frozen Vistula Lagoon. Let me point out here, basically, this lagoon, along the Baltic Sea, a 56-mile stretch of brackish water, since all other routes had already been cut off by the Soviet army. The water began to thaw in some areas while the horses were crossing. Many sank into the water and drowned. Several of these treks, including relatives of the family from a stud farm in East Prussia, rested in Mutrin before continuing. Once they arrived in the West, life was not much easier. There was not much food for anyone, and people in the West were reluctant to help, overwhelmed by a huge influx of refugees, while they themselves were struggling to rebuild their own lives. The horses were immediately put to work on farms as a way to earn some money for their owners. Those that survived became the ancestors of today's Trakehner breed, popular horses that appear in dressage, jumping, and other equestrian events. As a silver lining, there's now an ongoing cordial exchange between the Soviet-run stud farms in East Prussia and German stud farms. The picture on the left shows one of the many treks making its way to the west as it passed through Gdansk. The picture on the right shows what the roads going west look like. In the village of Mutrin, thanks to the foresight of the family, there had been secret preparations underway for some time. On March 7th, when official permission to evacuate had been given, the villagers began to flee toward the harbor towns, where they hoped to get onto a ship. On March 8th, Mutrin was occupied by Soviet troops. On the way, the villagers were attacked by fighter planes and disbanded. Some of them reached the harbor and managed to escape by ship to Denmark. The greater part, however, was overtaken by the Soviet troops and returned home, from where they were eventually deported over the course of the following 2 years. After 1945, much of local history was erased. The names were changed, and many of the buildings were destroyed or allowed to fall apart. Cemeteries were desecrated. Meanwhile, over 98% of the new Polish residents of the area had themselves been displaced and evicted from areas farther east. They knew what it meant to lose one's history. So not only confronting a virtual blank slate, they also struggled to gain a foothold in an area that had been depleted of tools and farm equipment. Most of it had been taken away by the Soviets. In the years after 1945, metal was at a premium, collected from everywhere and brought to a scrap heap, where it was melted down in order to be repurposed. 2 items belonging to the Tsitsevets family were also taken to the scrap heap. One was a huge bronze bell. In 1933, the workers in Mutrin had presented that bell to the owner in honor of his 50th anniversary as manager of the estate, and placed it into a small tower in the park of the manor. It bore the inscription, "Lord bless the works of our hand." The other was a large iron cross taken from the desecrated family cemetery. It was inscribed with the name Nikolaus von Sitzewitz, who was born in 1645. Several young Poles decided that these relics should be rescued. Sneaking into the scrapyard in the dead of night, they managed to retrieve them and installed the cross in the churchyard of a little church where the family used to attend services, and they hung the bell in the bell tower. I might add that that little church used to be a Protestant church and is now a lovingly maintained Catholic one. History matters, and it is vital to keep track of every little bit of history, whether in stories or in physical relics. Peter, my protagonist, learns that a tree had been planted roughly 90 years before he was born. And he learned that this same tree was still standing 300 years later. This is the story of the tree. Jakob von Sitzewitz planted the tree in 1555. It was called the Schifferlinde, or mariner's linden tree. According to the family chronicle, a member of the family would light a glowing fire next to the tree on dark and stormy nights. The fishermen rewarded the family with salt and herrings. Although the linden tree was more than 24 miles from the Baltic Sea, it was marked on nautical charts as a guide. In 1931, the tree was declared a protected natural monument of the Stolp district. It is still standing, even though about half of the branches were lost when the tree was hit by lightning during a storm in the 1980s. Here it is in the 1980s before. Here it is a little bit more recently, battered, but still there. In conclusion, The Amber Bear of Slupsk is one of my favorite stories. In the book, there's a scene where my protagonist tries to console Lioba. Lioba had searched for her parents in Stolp and had learned that they, together with about 1,000 other Stolp residents, had committed suicide rather than face the incoming Soviet army. Lioba is distraught. Peter tells her the legend of the Amber Bear, an ancient legend about a hunter who had been successful at all his undertakings until he had lost his precious Amber Bear amulet, his bear of happiness. Peter reminds Lioba that she has her own amulet, an amber crane that will give her strength and courage when she needs it most. To his amazement, Lioba tells him that the bear exists and was found in a peat bog near the town of Stolp in 1887. It is estimated to be at least 3,000 years old. It might be even older, because similar amulets have been found in Denmark and date back to about 12,000 BC. After a long journey through various museums, the bear eventually arrived at its permanent home in a museum in Szczecin, Poland. But the citizens of Stolp never were reconciled to the loss of their amber bear. And in 1924, members of the Amber Guild created a copy. In recent decades, the town elders developed a new tradition. Every year, the town auctions a copy of the bear and donates the resulting funds to charity. And every year, the town commissions an amber master to create a new copy. Thus, the Amber Bear continues to bring happiness to the citizens of the town. Thank you very much for listening. I apologize for my strong accent, and I welcome questions and comments.
All right, thank you, Malv. That was fantastic. If anybody has any questions, please do feel free to submit them again in the chat or the Q&A function here on Zoom. And I'll be sure to ask any that come up. See, the first one that we have here says, did Romans use amber?
Oh, I'm sure they did. Yes, absolutely. I can't right now refer to specific instances, but yes, absolutely.
Let's see if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to submit them. And in the meantime, Malv, if anybody's interested in your book, where could they buy it?
You can either go check out my website, which is malvevonhassell.com, malvevonhassell.com. And it's available at bookshop.org, indiebound.org, Amazon, basically any bookshop of your choice.
Any place you could probably find a book, you could probably find this one.
Yeah.
And a leading question, because I have your website pulled up here and ready. I've just posted the link in the chat for anybody here that's watching. You can click that link to go to Mal's website and purchase the book or read more about it if you would like. Another question we have here. Someone saying that was fabulous. Thank you. And can you talk more about some of the medicinal properties that amber might have?
Amber was thought to have healing properties, either when it was ground into an oil, turned into an oil, and it also was thought to provide healing by just wearing the amber amulet. Even the fumes were thought to have medicinal properties, and sometimes it was ground up and added in as a drink, and people used it in Peter's time. They used it for liver complaints, for anxiety, for a whole range of issues or illnesses. Even today, there are all sorts of websites that claim that amber has medicinal properties. I don't know about that. I do know that the the legends around it always imply that if you wear amber close to the skin, it provides you with comfort, it makes you feel stronger.
Somebody else was asking if people today still consider it to have magical properties, but I think you kind of answered that. It makes you a little calmer, things like that. Is there anything else magical about it?
I think it depends to whom you talk. Certainly in the 17th century, there were enormous, so many different myths also about the origin of amber that seem to imply that amber was somehow magical. People didn't really understand how amber had originated and came up with wild theories about. One of my favorite ones is the sperm of whales that solidified and then washed up as amber on the shore. Tears of the gods, there are all sorts of legends about various Greek gods and other mythological creatures who wept and whose tears turned into amber. Yeah.
Interesting. Does amber have a smell at all? And if so, what does it smell like?
It's lovely. It's very, if anybody here has played a violin, you use something with which you sharpen your bow, you rub your bow, and it has that kind of a scent, sort of resiny, sweet, bittersweet, pungent. And that scent comes out when you heat amber.
Okay. And we have one last question we have on here. Can you talk about how the ordinary citizen dealt with the rise of Nazism? Are there stories of resistance and/or information about complacency?
Wow. Okay, that's a very big question.
Actually,
Actually, I would love to refer you to a biography I just released of my mother, who herself was what you might qualify as an ordinary citizen who was not herself a Nazi sympathizer, who tried to survive and get through the war. She, on the other hand, happened to be associated and friends with people in the resistance. I would say it really depends to whom you're talking. In my particular family's case, there were a number of people involved in the resistance. In many family cases, you had just people trying to live, to make it, to get through the war. And that meant often looking away, not commenting, because if you commented, you put yourself at risk, you put your family at risk. Is that collaborating? It's a very difficult subject. And I don't suppose my answers here would do it justice. I did discuss this to some extent in the biography of my mother, since she was born in 1923 and came of age in the 1930s, and she survived, and she knew things to some extent, but not that much. She was aware. She lived under censorship basically from the mid-1930s on. That was a part of life. It was a part of life for her as a very young woman to guard what she said, to be careful. When she was at university, there were only a few people with whom she would speak openly, because everybody was afraid. For the average person, news were very hard to come by. My father would go to the weekly, to go to the movies, and in the movies they would show the weekly newsreel, and the newsreel was essentially propaganda. And it was a very clever form of propaganda. And my father said, you learned to watch this newsreel by translating it. So if there was mention of a valiant fight, it meant a fairly bitter retreat and people were beaten. You learned to translate, to read between the lines, to simply reverse what you heard, and you had an idea of what was happening. So yeah, it was difficult. And I can't really do this question justice. It's a very important question. What was it like for ordinary citizens? So thank you for asking that.
But something you said a lot in your talk, history matters. All these little stories and these little pieces getting put together. The story of your mother's life and her sort of small part in that overall large history sounds really fascinating, and definitely be a great conversation to listen in on. And maybe worthwhile while they're on your website purchasing that book as well. Might help answer some of those questions. But I don't know if we have any other questions in here right now. We get to end on that nice big one. How fun is that? If anybody here today liked this talk, please, you can subscribe to our YouTube page. You can visit our website, southamptonhistory.org, sign up for any of our future lectures we have coming out. And please be sure to head over to Mal's website, malvonhassell.com. I'll make sure to have that in the description of the YouTube video below. And thank you again for joining us, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.